0312 local time, Iranian Air Defense Command, Western Iran. The radar operator sees the formation at the edge of his scope, and his system does exactly what it was designed to do. It paints, it classifies, it feeds the targeting solution to the SA-59 battery 12 kilometers north. The system is ready to fire. Then his screen goes blank, not jammed, not degraded, gone. The way a screen goes when the antenna 60 feet above him no longer exists. He has 90 seconds left. Across Western Iran, the same blank screen is showing up in every air defense command post along the approach corridors. Then Tehran, then the central command nodes, then the long-range radar network covering every border Iran tracks. Iran spent 20 months rebuilding this system. Billions of dollars, thousands of technicians, 5 interlocking layers engineered specifically to make what was about to happen impossible. The first wave did not target Iran's nuclear sites, did not target the missile production lines, did not target the regime command bunkers. Those were for later. The first wave targeted the radars, and the batteries that defended the radars, and the command nodes that coordinated the batteries. Before Iran knew what was hitting it, Iran had already lost the ability to see it coming. What happened next ran for 40 days. The fortress. Iran thought it had rebuilt February 28, 2026. Operation Roaring Lion. Day 0 to understand what Israel destroyed. You need to understand what Iran had built. Iran's air defense was not one system. It was 5 layers stacked on top of each other, each one engineered to cover the gaps in the layer below. Layer 1, long-range interceptors, the SA-59 battery, Iran's domestically produced version of the Russian S-300. Engagement range 300 kilometers, phased array radar capable of tracking 100 targets simultaneously. The system Russia marketed across the globe for 30 years as the definitive answer to any Western-style air campaign. Iran had bought it. Iran had built its own version of it. Iran had positioned it across the country. Layer 2, medium-range coverage, the SA-63, 105 kilometers of engagement range, designed to pick up anything that slipped past the SA-59 belt. Cruise missiles, low-flying fighters, helicopters at standoff range. Layer 3, short-range point defense, the SA-65, 24 kilometers, fast reaction time, built to engage anything that survived the first 2 layers inside the 24-kilometer bubble around strategic sites. Layer 4, older anti-aircraft guns. The last ring, radar-directed optical systems for anything that made it through everything else. And Layer 5, the long-range radar network, scanning every approach corridor to Iranian airspace, feeding targeting data down through all 4 firing layers simultaneously. The eyes for the entire architecture. 5 layers, interlocking, redundant, designed to make Israeli air operations over Iran impossible. In June 2025, Operation Rising Lion degraded roughly half of this architecture in 12 days. That campaign had been limited. Israeli aircraft had to route through specific corridors. The F-35E Aedirs had the range to reach western and northern Iran, but not reliably beyond. Iran's central and eastern air defense belt had largely survived. Iranian commanders studied that campaign the way a defender studies a draw. Iran watched that campaign end. Iran watched the Israeli aircraft go home. And Iran began rebuilding immediately. 20 months of reconstruction, billions of dollars. The exact same systems in the exact same positions, plus hardening, plus dispersal, plus redundancy. Concrete revetments built around radar installations, mobile battery sites rotated weekly to complicate targeting, additional S-300 variants negotiated through intermediaries, Iranian technicians trained in Russia on deeper maintenance cycles. By February 2026, Iran had restored the architecture to near its pre-Rising Lion level. Iranian commanders believed the airspace was sealed again. Their planners had war-gamed every Israeli attack profile they could model. The F-35I Aedir stealth approach, the F-15I Ram standoff, the F-16I Sufa with precision munitions. Every approach had a countermeasure. Every altitude had a shooter. Every corridor had a radar. They were ready. What they had not modeled is because no defense doctrine had ever been run against it, was an opening strike designed to destroy their ability to defend before anything strategic was targeted. Israel did not plan to fight through Iranian air defense. Israel planned to remove it first. 20 months inside Israeli planning cells. Mossad running operatives into Iran. Amman, the IDF Intelligence Directorate, building the target picture. CIA sharing signals intelligence. Over 5,000 new targets identified during those 20 months, every one of them mapped, sequenced, and assigned to specific aircraft. By February 27th, the packages were ready. By 0300 on February 28th, the first wave was airborne. The Genesis wave, 0310 local time, approach corridors over Iraq and Syria. The formation inbound to Iran that morning was the largest the Israeli Air Force had ever assembled, approximately 200 aircraft, F-35I Adirs running lead as the strike platform, F-15I Rayams carrying the heavy ordnance, F-16I Sufas working the secondary targets, KC-46 tankers from U.S. forces refueling the strike package over Allied airspace, Hermes 900 armed drones already over Iran, at altitude, on station, with targeting data flowing to the fighter jets behind them. The formation had one objective for Wave 1. It was not the uranium enrichment facilities, it was not the ballistic missile production sites, it was not the regime command bunkers. Wave 1 targeted the eyes and the missiles defending them. The SA-59 battery radar dishes along the western approach corridors first, the SA-63 mobile launch platforms around Tehran first, the command and control nodes that coordinated the entire architectures first, and the long-range radar stations that fed every targeting computer in the system first. Every munition that Wave 1 aircraft released was aimed at something designed to shoot down aircraft. Not every target was a launcher. Some were radar vans, vehicles the size of shipping containers that held the electronic brain of an SA-59 battery. Destroy the van and the battery was a museum piece. Some were power substations, some were fiber optic junction boxes buried under roadways that linked the radar network to the central command architecture. Every one of them had been mapped during those 20 months. Every one of them had been assigned to a specific aircraft with a specific weapon loaded for that specific target. They called it the Genesis wave, and it was designed to collapse the entire 5-layer architecture before a single strategic target was touched. The IAF struck over 500 targets in the opening hours. The radars went first because radars cannot be defended by batteries that have just been destroyed. The batteries went first because batteries cannot fire when the radar feeding them targeting data is rubble. The command nodes went first because firing crews cannot coordinate without the officers who coordinate them. Every piece of the Iranian architecture was collapsing into the pieces next to it, simultaneously because that was the design. Within 24 hours of the first weapon release, the Israeli Air Force had achieved aerial superiority across the entire country. Not partial superiority, not limited superiority, full operational freedom across Iranian airspace. For the first time in the history of the conflict, Israel could fly anywhere over Iran. Not just the western approach corridors the F-35I could reach in Rising Lion, not just the routes Israel had proven in June 2025, all of it. Tehran overhead, Isfahan overhead, the eastern border that Iran had considered untouchable overhead. What the Israeli Air Force could not reach in 12 days of Rising Lion, the Israeli Air Force reached in 24 hours of Roaring Lion. The difference was not range. The difference was that Iran's radar network could no longer see anything approaching. The train method and the drone that never left 0415 local time. Tehran airspace, then Wave 2 arrived, then Wave 3, then Wave 4. The Israelis called it the train method. Instead of massed strikes followed by withdrawal, Israel sent continuous trains of fighter jets toward Tehran at short intervals. Wave after wave, directions rotating, timing staggered, each one arriving before Iranian defenders could reposition from the last one, each one hitting different approach corridors so that the survivors of the previous wave had no idea where the next wave was coming from. Iran could not rest. Iranian air defense crews cannot reload quickly under active air attack. Iranian commanders cannot coordinate when their communication nodes have been destroyed. Iranian radar operators cannot track multiple incoming formations when their radars have been silenced. The tempo was the weapon. A static, dispersed air defense spread across a country the size of Iran cannot concentrate against a continuous rotational attack. Every time Iran tried to mass its remaining systems against one approach, the next wave came from a different approach. Every time Iran tried to move a battery, the Hermes 900 overhead saw the movement, and the battery was destroyed before it finished repositioning. The U.S. Air Force was watching closely. 2 years later, during Operation Epic Fury, U.S. Central Command would use the same train method against Iranian targets in the Strait of Hormuz. But in February 2026, the train was Israeli. And while the fighter jets rotated, something else never left the sky: the Hermes 900. Israeli armed drones operated simultaneously with the fighter jets from the opening hour of the Genesis wave. Their role: locate and destroy Iranian missile launch crews preparing to fire surface-to-surface missiles at Israel, engage in real time, maintain surveillance in the gaps between fighter wave windows. One IAF reserve drone operator later described flying his Hermes toward Iran as the Genesis wave launched. His task was specific. Every Iranian crew that moved toward a launcher, he watched, and he held fire only until he had the targeting solution. He described Iranian launch crews running from dispersal sites toward their transporters as the first Israeli strikes hit elsewhere in the country. The crews believed their location had not been compromised. They had not heard their own radar go silent. They were preparing to fire. The operator watched them prep the launcher, watched them open the erector, watched them load, then he fired. Fighter jets must return to Israel to refuel. The Hermes 900 does not. Iranian launch crews lived under continuous observation for 40 days. 3 Israeli technical elements running simultaneously from the opening hour, the Genesis wave, destroying the air defense architecture before anything strategic was targeted. The train method, sustaining pressure faster than Iranian defenders could react. And the Hermes 900, closing every gap between fighter waves with persistent drone coverage. Iran's 5-layer architecture was built to defend against one type of campaign: a massed Western-style airstrike that could be detected at long range, tracked through multiple altitude bands, and engaged by interlocking fires. It was not built for what actually arrived. Every countermeasure Iran had required the previous countermeasure to function. Every layer assumed the layer above it was still shooting. Every radar assumed the command node was still relaying. Every battery assumed the radar was still painting. Remove the eyes in the first hour, and the whole architecture goes blind simultaneously. The Iranian SAM operators who survived the opening strikes were now firing without radar guidance, using older infrared systems, operating without central coordination, firing at the sound of aircraft passing overhead. That is not an integrated air defense. That is independent operators with shoulder weapons. Here is the detail Russia does not want anyone doing the math on. Before February 28, 2026, the S-300 and its equivalents were considered the definitive answer to Western-style air campaigns. Russia had marketed the system globally for 30 years as the weapon that made precision air operations impossible against any state that fielded it. Export orders had followed across multiple continents. Countries paid billions for the guarantee. Iran had bought that guarantee. Iran had built its own version of it. Iran had rebuilt it after June 2025, positioned it across the country, and loaded it with ammunition. Iran fired it at 200 Israeli jets. It did not stop a single one. According to Israeli military assessments, 92% of Iran's most advanced mobile air defense systems are destroyed. Not suppressed, not degraded, not forced offline temporarily, physically destroyed. Radar antennas burned out, launch vehicles struck at their operating positions, command nodes eliminated. Transporter erector launchers hit with precision munitions while still parked at dispersal sites. 80% of Iran's long-range radar network gone. 75 to 80% of medium-range systems gone. Every nation that purchased S-300 or equivalent systems as their primary counter to F-35 class aircraft now has a combat record to reference. That record belongs to the Israeli Air Force. China is recalculating. Russia is recalculating. Every adversary military doctrine that assumed S-300 class air defense could stop a sustained F-35 campaign now requires revision. The system Russia said was unbreakable broke, and Iran still had one answer left. Iran's last card. Iran launched approximately 550 surface-to-surface missiles at Israel throughout the 40-day conflict. Not defense, retaliation. Iran's calculation was specific volume and simultaneity. The sheer quantity of missiles aimed at Israeli air bases was designed to disrupt sortie generation, force pilots into shelters, ground aircraft, degrade operational tempo. If Iran could not stop Israeli jets over Iran, Iran could still try to slow them down before they took off. It worked, partially. On at least 2 occasions during the campaign, IAF formations already airborne toward Iran were recalled mid-flight, when intelligence indicated an imminent Iranian missile volley aimed at the aircraft's intended return base. Israeli commanders did not risk aircraft landing into incoming fire. They broke off the mission and routed the package home through an alternate corridor. Those recalls are the only confirmed moments in the entire campaign that Iranian action altered Israeli operational decisions in real time. 2 recalls out of 800 strike sorties. That is the ceiling of Iran's operational effect. 90 of those 550 missiles impacted Israeli soil. 64 of them were cluster munitions, single warheads that split into multiple simultaneous impact points, specifically designed to saturate Iron Dome with more targets than the interceptor system could engage at once. The IDF states that no Israeli inside a protected space was killed by a cluster strike. The Iranians had learned from previous exchanges. They knew that radar-guided missiles were not the main threat to the F-35Y over Iran. They knew the stealth profile absorbed radar signatures. What the stealth profile could not fully absorb was infrared. So Iran deployed infrared-guided systems alongside the conventional SA-MIS, a multispectral threat. Not one detection method, 2, and it mattered. On March 19, 2026, over central Iran, an F-35. I made an emergency landing after being damaged in flight. Iran's adaptation was not without effect. That is 1 aircraft. Not shot down, damaged, flown back, recovered, against what Iran was deploying and what Iran had rebuilt for 20 months specifically to destroy. 1 damaged F-35Y is the mathematical proof that the system worked exactly as designed. The IDF flew more than 800 strike sorties across those 40 days, approximately 19,000 munitions. Every single one of those sorties flown without a single aircraft confirmed loss to Iranian fire over Iran during the main campaign. Not because Iran did not try, because Iran could not see them coming. The numbers and the reassessment. Day 40, final IDF assessment. More than 4,000 targets struck, over 2,000 Iranian regime operatives and commanders eliminated, approximately 70% of Iran's ballistic missile launcher capacity destroyed, 92% of the most advanced mobile air defense systems gone, 80% of long-range radars gone, 75 to 80% of medium-range systems gone. 8 to 10% of Iran's air defense architecture remains dispersed, concealed, operating under strict emissions control to avoid detection. These systems cannot coordinate centrally. They cannot form an integrated defense. They cannot track a sustained campaign, but they can fire opportunistically. The F-35 that took damage on March 19th proves the remaining fraction still carries lethal potential. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir has directed the military to prepare for immediate resumption of strikes if Iran does not meet ceasefire and nuclear terms. The air campaign achieved its military objectives. The political resolution it was meant to enable is still being negotiated. And now the detail nobody is calculating, 20 months. That is how long Iran spent rebuilding the architecture that was destroyed in Rising Lion. Billions of dollars, thousands of technicians, the same systems in the same positions with additional hardening, additional dispersal, additional redundancy, 24 hours. That is how long it took Israel to destroy that architecture the second time. The ratio is 20 months of reconstruction against 24 hours of destruction, 730 days of rebuilding against 1 day of collapse. If Iran rebuilds again, which Iran will, the reconstruction cycle will be longer. The technicians are fewer, the funding is under international pressure. The component supply chains are compromised. Iran's next air defense doctrine will not be built around the S-300 equivalent. It cannot be. The combat record has been written. The Bavar 373, Iran's domestically developed alternative to the S-300, was engaged by Israeli aircraft on multiple occasions during Roaring Lion. It did not perform to its specification. Iran's homegrown answer is now on the same record list as the system it was built to replace. Every export client that was considering the S-300 or the Bavar 373 is reconsidering. And every adversary planning a future air campaign against an S-300 defended airspace now has the data. The aircraft that was designed to defeat these systems performed exactly as designed, at scale, continuously, across 40 days, without losing an aircraft to Iranian fire over Iran during the main campaign. The test Russia said could not be passed was passed by the Israeli Air Force. in Iranian airspace in less than 24 hours. Iran spent 2 years rebuilding the system that was supposed to make its airspace unreachable. According to Israeli military assessments, 92% of it was destroyed in 24 hours. The aircraft are still flying.